I started teaching in 1970. Okay, you can do the maths. That makes me very old. Or very wise. Or both, basically. I started teaching in a secondary school. As Lorraine said, I was teaching English to native speakers of the language. I became a head teacher of 2 secondary schools and then moved into higher education when I became Professor of Education eventually. Now I'm telling you all of that really, not to try to convince you that I know everything. I don't. My wife is a teacher. She reminds me of how little I know because she's still in the classroom. I take education very seriously, but I also enjoy it. I think the most important quality for a teacher is a sense of humour. If you don't have a sense of humour, if you can laugh with the children, then you're in the wrong job. So from time to time I will be quite light-hearted, and maybe even share a joke with you, but it's not because I don't think education is important, it's just because I think that we have to keep our feet on the ground. Okay? Okay, got the accent? Tuning in? Are you sure? Okay, here goes. Now, I was asked to talk a bit about what we know already about learning. What do we know about how children learn? Now let me, just before I do that, just remind you of what it used to be like. I was at school in the 1950s and in the 1960s. In those days, teachers didn't feel it was particularly useful to know how children learn, because the job of a teacher was just to stand up and teach. And if you learned, then you learned. If you didn't, it wasn't my fault. It was your fault. But since then, we've learned a lot about how young people learn. We've learned a lot from our experience, we've learned a lot from research, and we've learned a lot from theories of learning. So I'm going to touch on all 3 of those as being really important. And I'm going to try and maybe give you some kind of indication of what I think we at least ought to know about how children learn. Okay? And I'm talking about all children across the world of all ages. I'm not talking about any specific group. Okay? So, now I think this is going to work, Shona. Do you have to point it in any particular?
No, I think
Just
put it on the table just to activate it first of all. Right now. No.
okay?
No. Okay, you have to use it.
You have to use this. Okay. 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 I can do this. I can do this. Okay. Now the first thing I think that's worth reminding ourselves is of this very simple truth. And it was first espoused by a man called Lev Vygotsky. He was Russian. Some of you will know of his work. It wasn't translated until the mid-1950s, the middle of the last century, because he was working in communist Russia at the time. But the foundation of his theory is that social interaction promotes cognitive development. Or to put it more simply, talking with other people makes you clever, helps you to develop as a learner. Now my wife says that most women have always known this, because women talk. In our country, at least in Scotland, men don't talk. Men don't talk. They don't talk about their feelings, they don't share things. They're strong, silent types. But Vygotsky nailed it in her view. If you talk a lot, you're likely to get more clever. That's why women are more clever than men. Okay, you with me on this one? Okay, I guess this audience, just the demographic of this audience means that at least having strong ground. But more importantly, it's a fundamental underpinning of collaborative learning. Collaborative learning, cooperative learning, learning and interaction with others. And that's important because I'm at the moment working with a secondary school in my town in Scotland, and secondary schools don't quite get that. In secondary schools, children don't work nearly as much in collaborative groupings as they do in primary schools and in preschool. And that's a big issue. It's a big challenge for secondary schools, but I'll come back to that. Okay? Now, here's where I'm going to try something which is, I think, quite brave for someone like me who comes from Scotland, I'm going to use the word love. Love in public. Scottish men don't even use the word love in private. Okay, we're a bit shy when it comes to that kind of thing. But this is a quotation from an American writer called Maya Angelou, who some of you will know. She just died quite recently. She wrote a lot of autobiographical work, and she wrote some really good poetry. And this is a line taken from a poem about her grandmother. And her grandmother was very old. She had had lots of jobs throughout her long life, and one of her jobs had been in classrooms, loving children to understanding. Now for me, that sums it up. If you are a teacher and you don't love children, you're in the wrong job, basically. But loving isn't just a soft, fuzzy, touchy-feely kind of thing. It's a kind of high expectation love. A love which says, I demand that you do as well as you can. I demand the very best from you because I love you. I want you to be successful because I care about you. And for me too, the last word in that line is absolutely crucial, because it's not just about learning, it's not just about packing children's heads with stuff, with facts and figures and so on. It's about understanding. We call it in Scotland deep learning. Deep learning. Learning which can be transferred from one situation to another. Learning which will be the foundation for the rest of your life as a learner. Not just to pass an exam. It's not simply about getting over the next hurdle, it's about making you a lifelong learner, is a phrase that we tend to use. Okay? Now, before I change each slide, I'm going to pause. Just stop. Now, it will be a short stop, so you need to be quick. And you might want to just ask me a question, or make a comment, ask for some clarification. Okay? But don't be shy. Please don't sit there being polite. If you think I've said something and you're not very sure about it, please. Okay? When I speak in Scotland, lots of people interrupt me. That's the way we are in Scotland. If someone doesn't disagree, they'll tell you right there and then on the spot. Okay, so please at any time. So, let's have a look. Let's have a look at some aims of education. Now at this point, I'm wondering how you would feel if I asked you from time to time in the course of this afternoon to speak to the person next to you. Just have a quick discussion. The reason I'm going to do that is because it will allow you to have the discussion in your own language for a start. And that will just give you a sense of whether you've understood or the person you're speaking to has understood. But it'll make sure you don't fall asleep, essentially. I'd like you to be awake by the end of the session. And the best way of doing that is by giving you little unplanned bits of conversation to do. Okay? So, let's think about the aims of education. Would you, with the person next to you, could you just see if you can agree on one important aim of education? Just one. Okay, please don't feel under pressure. I'm not asking everyone to do it, but anybody who feels confident enough just to tell me one of the aims you were discussing, that would be good.
I'll say our word, to develop understanding.
To develop understanding, that's one aim. Okay, to develop understanding. Any more? Tricky, isn't it? I don't want to put anybody under undue pressure. Anybody else want to contribute an aim? Nobody?
Yes, Mike.
Confidence.
Okay, to develop confidence. This is interesting because that will come up in this next slide too. Any others?
Develop skills.
To develop skills. Yeah. 3 so far. Understanding, confidence, skills. Any others? Going once? Going twice?
To learn something about yourself, how to learn.
Okay, interesting. To learn something about yourself, or to learn how to learn. There is a big word for that, as you know, metacognition. Learning how to learn. Okay, it's becoming interesting. Any more? Yes.
Have fun when you learn.
Oh, have fun. Did you say fun?
Yeah.
Fun. Goodness sake, learning is a serious. I'm only joking. Listen. I once sat on a big national committee in Scotland. Lorraine mentioned it, and we produced the current Scottish curriculum called A Curriculum is for Excellence, right? And I was on the group, and I got a chance to speak one morning at the group session, and I said, "Can I suggest we should have the word fun in this report?" And one of the other persons in the group said, "Absolutely not. We can't possibly have the word fun in a report." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, if you put the word fun in the report, people who read it will think all learning should be fun." And then she paused for a minute and she said, "Some learning just has to be boring." Boring and dull. So I'm with you on this one.
Yeah.
We didn't get the word fun in, but we did get the word enjoyment.
Enjoyment.
Close,
Yes.
close,
of course,
but
yeah.
not quite fun. So I'm with you on that one. Learning
Yeah.
should be fun most of the time. Most of the time. Any others? One more? Okay, that's okay. That'll do it. We'll come back. We'll come back later. So let's have a look at some aims. Now, here's a set of aims which UNESCO came up with in 1998. And these were aims for education across the world. These were aims that they felt everyone could sign up to. So that's the order in which they came when I first saw them. But the more that I look at them, the more I think you should read them from the bottom upwards. That seems to me to be a more logical set of aims. So it starts with where a comment from over here was, learning to be. So one of the things about education is learning, who am I? Who am I? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a human being in the 21st century? What kind of learner am I? What are the kinds of things that I can do naturally? And what are the kinds of things that I don't seem to be able to do very well at all? What do I need to change? So learning to be, it can also include the big questions like, why am I here? What's the meaning of life? The meaning of life is 42, according to the book. But why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Is there a God? All of that kind of stuff can be in there. Learning to be. Now, learning to live together is an interesting one. You think back to Vygotsky and social interaction, and just look at the world at the moment. Go home tonight, switch on your television. What will you see? You'll see plenty of examples of how not to learn to live together. So it seems to me that that's the biggest challenge for the 21st century. Somehow or other, we have to live with other people who are different from us. We have to celebrate difference rather than try to kill it or to try to subjugate it or whatever. So, learning to live together. Learning to do is an interesting one. Learning to do practical things, learning to apply your learning outside of the school. As a secondary school teacher, a lot of the subjects in the curriculum that were practical subjects were not regarded as important as the academic subjects. So maybe we should change that. Maybe we should realise that learning to do something that's practical is at least as important as learning something theoretically. So that's a challenge. And of course, learning to know has always been the top one, hasn't it, in most countries, because that's the one you can test. You can examine. You can put a number on. You can say you got 25 out of 30, as if that means something. Or you can give someone an A, or an A plus, or an A minus, or whatever. So, I would suggest that the good thing about that set of aims is they're easy to remember. They all have the word learning in it, which is interesting, but they're in the wrong order. I would change the order around. Now, so what have we done with that in our country? Well, again, as Lorraine mentioned already, these are the four kind of characteristics, as we see them, of young people, of what they should be when young people leave school. They should be all of those things. They'll not always be the same, they'll not always have the same set of skills, as was mentioned earlier on, but they will all have the opportunity to develop into that kind of human being. And that's our aim. You could say they're very general, a bit vague. quite difficult to pin down. But in fact, what we've done in Scotland is we've tried to describe each of them in detail and suggest to schools what it is they might do if they want to create confident individuals, or if they want to have responsible citizens, that kind of thing. I might as well mention this and just get it over with. As you probably know, our country voted against independence last week. If at any point I start to cry this afternoon, it won't be about this particular session, it'll be about the failure of my country to become independent. So, will we become responsible citizens as a result of the independence referendum? I think possibly yes, because 85% of our country turned out to vote. That's responsible citizenship, isn't it? So at least that's a plus, even although they voted in the wrong direction. But that was responsible citizenship. So you can see these things are practical as well as theoretical. Okay. Now, I thought it might be worth adding into the mix, not just what we know about how children learn, but what is it that good teachers do. Okay. So I thought maybe I would pose you a question. Are good teachers born, or are they made? Are they born, or are they made? Would anybody like to declare themselves in favour of either of those two? Is a good teacher born or made? What do you think? Oh, you've stolen my thunder. That was going to be my bit. A bit of both, isn't it? Some people genuinely believe that good teachers are born. You're just naturally good at it. You just wander into university, you go through the course, you turn up at Lorraine's school and you go and teach primary 7 and you're just a natural and that's the way it goes. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen some of those naturals in my time, and quite often they don't last the pace because they haven't got other stuff that's needed, like resilience and hard work and commitment and so on. And I'm with you in this one. I think that good teachers are a mixture of both. If you were to come across one of your former pupils pushing a buggy with a new baby, would you stop and say, "Oh, you've got a new baby. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it a teacher?" You wouldn't say that, would you? You wouldn't say that. And what colour would you put on a teacher? Blue for boys and pink for girls. For a teacher? Beige. Something like that. Anyway, so the point I'm making here is that every teacher who is a good teacher has become a good teacher. Some people will have more gifts, if you like, which are more natural to a classroom setting. But I've seen some very, very shy, quiet, very introspective students who've become brilliant teachers. And I've seen some people who are confident and go into a classroom and think that the kids like them because they're young and they're trendy and so on, who don't really become good teachers. So my point here is that what we need to realise is that every teacher, including ourselves, is always a learning teacher. The day that we stop learning is a day to stop teaching, isn't it? That wasn't always appreciated in my day, I have to say, but I think we're beginning to realise that teachers are learners too. So, let's have a look at one of the challenges. If a child appears unable to learn something, what conclusions should we draw? Now, I mentioned earlier on that when I was at school, the conclusion that a teacher might draw is, well, that pupil is just not intelligent. Or, that pupil is not intelligent enough to do my subject. Usually mathematics teachers used to think that kind of way, or physics, or the so-called difficult subjects. So in a sense here, what we're looking for is something which will change the nature of the relationship between teaching and learning. Now again, I've got no apologies, but I'm going back to Vygotsky. Vygotsky said, if the child appears unable to learn, do not assume that the child is unintelligent. But he went on, and I've not put it on the slide, he went on to say, rather assume that the child's intelligence is lying dormant, it's sleeping. It's there, but it's not yet been wakened up, or we've not yet found a key to opening up that kind of talent which a young person may well have. Now, the reason why I'm making such a big thing of this is because traditionally formal education has, in my view, taken the view that young people should be sorted out at some point in their career as learners according to some kind of measurement of their intelligence or of their ability in certain subjects. And quite often, once that decision has been made, it's very difficult for the child ever to break out of it. So the assumption may be that if I don't grasp some of the concepts of mathematics, say when I'm in primary 1 or primary 2, someone might conclude that child's not very bright. That child should be in the bottom group for maths. And that child may well be in the bottom group for maths for the next 6 years or more. So there's a challenge for us, I think. Can we change our mindset, and can we begin to believe that every child is born with the capability of being a successful learner, if only we can find a way of presenting whatever it is that has to be learned in a better way, in a more accessible way. There's a man called Jerome Bruner. Anybody come across Jerome Bruner? B-R-U-N-E-R. Jerome Bruner was, I must tell my Jerome Bruner story. Jerome Bruner was a highly influential educationist in America, in the United States, in the 1950s and 1960s particularly. Now the younger people in the group will not remember this. In fact, maybe nobody in this room will remember this, maybe I'm the only one who can remember it. But there was at one time in the 1950s a space race. The Americans were racing the Russians to get a man into space, or at least to get something up there, a satellite into space. And of course the Americans, being Americans, assumed that they were going to win that race. Being what Russia was a backward country as they saw it, most Americans probably couldn't find it on a map. Anyway, so they were pretty certain that they would get there first. And what happened? Well, the Russians got there first and put the first satellite into space. Now, when that happened, there was a huge outcry in America. And all the spotlight was put on schools. Schools are the problem. Schools must do better. Schools must ensure that American science and technology never comes second to the Russians again. So they asked Professor Jerome Bruner of Harvard to convene a meeting of mathematicians, physicists, Nobel Prize winners, teacher educators, a whole series of people. Sent them away for 3 days, had a big conference, produced a book and the solution. And of course people thought they already knew what the solution is. The solution is try and identify your mathematicians and your physicists as early as possible, preferably in the womb, before they're born if you can. If you can't do that as soon as they're born, try and identify them, put them into a hothouse environment, push them through the curriculum as fast as you can, make sure they become really, really, really intelligent and they can design all sorts of things. But Jerome Bruner was not playing ball with that particular notion. Jerome Bruner came up with the conclusion that American education should change, and it should have as its goal that every single child should emerge from school as a thinker. As a thinker. Interesting. That was his conclusion. Now you can imagine it did not go down very well with the people in government. Now what's my Jerome Bruner story? Well, about 5 years or so ago, I was sitting in a room with some colleagues who were trying to put together the programme for a conference in Glasgow, and we thought, what speaker could we have? We'd had Howard Gardner, we'd had David Perkins, we'd had Dylan William, we did all sorts of people. And somebody said, what about Jerome Bruner? And there was a hush. And somebody said, is he still alive? So we Googled him and found that not only was he still alive, he was 92 years of age and still working. So those of you who are contemplating early retirement, don't. Just keep working till you're 92 at least. Okay. Anyway, Jerome Bruner was 92. He was working in a university in New York. We contacted him by email, asked him if he would like to come across, speak at our conference, and he said yes. But I can't come for another year, because I've got commitments. Now you think about this, if you're 92 and you're making appointments a year ahead, that's optimism, isn't it? It's optimism. Now he came. He didn't only come once, he came twice. And I googled him before we came, he's still alive, still working, and he's 98 now. So, my point in a sense is that Brunner way back then was already saying what Vygotsky rather had been saying, and that is that we need to be very, very careful that we don't limit the potential of young people. We should be doing the opposite. We should be opening up the potential of young people. And that's why I think Vygotsky and Brunner are worth revisiting from time to time, just to remind ourselves. One of the things that Brunner said was that he believed that any concept can be understood by any child, provided the concept is given to the child with a courteous translation. That was the phrase he used. In other words, you can introduce any concept as long as you put it together in a format that the child will learn and can understand. There's another person in America who has developed a program called Philosophy for Children. He believes, unlike Piaget, that all children can think conceptually, provided you dress up the concepts in a form which is understandable to them. And he's produced little stories, like kind of children's stories, fables, that kind of nursery rhymes, just to present these concepts. So my point in a sense is, if we want children to learn, let's keep the door open to successful learning. Don't close the door, ever, I would say, but certainly don't close the door too early. And Lorraine and I were just reflecting how in our own country, and it saddens us very much, that some people are trying to do that, trying to force schools into sorting children out by ability very early on. So, there's a challenge. Right, let's have a little focus on the Learning Classroom now. I should say, I've got a copy of the book, The Learning Classroom, for every school in the project. Okay, just one copy. It is available as an e-book, and I can always send you the link if anybody wants to follow up that way, but I've got a hard copy for the schools who are part of the project. Okay, so let's just recap a wee bit on what we know already about classrooms. And we know that all learning doesn't happen in classrooms. In fact, we saw some really interesting learning taking place in the playground when we went for a lunch today. But the classroom is a kind of formal arena where learning is expected to happen. So, what do we know? Well, there's a thing called the ethos of the classroom. The term ethos is a term that's often applied to schools. So schools have a distinctive ethos. In fact, over the last 40 years, the research evidence on what makes a good school often puts ethos very high up in terms of the attributes. A good school is an ethos. A good school has an ethos which values everyone. So it's how we value people, right? My view is that the classroom ethos is even more important. So that when children arrive at your classroom, or the classrooms of your colleagues, what is it that they expect to find there? How will they be met? How will they be welcomed? How will the classroom itself contribute to learning? What will be the relationships within the classroom? Will it be a safe environment for people to make mistakes and to fail from time to time? Will it be an environment where everyone is expected to do their very best all the time, and so on? So the ethos of the classroom is something which I think is critical and sometimes gets missed because people look at the whole school rather than just the individual classroom. The second thing there, which I've just referred to, is high expectations. That's the number one attribute of a successful school, not just in my view, but in the view of 40 years worth of research. High expectations of all pupils, not just some, but of all. High expectations. High expectations involves a kind of contract, an agreement between the school and the learner. And we expect the learners always to do their best, but we must be there for them when they require help and support and assistance. And if someone is unable to do something, as Vygotsky said, then we don't blame them. Now, let me give you a little example of that from when I was at school. This is just to make you realise that nothing changes. Back in 1964, when I was in the 4th year of my secondary school, I was I was embarking on a course which we called Higher Maths. This was mathematics, aiming for the highest qualification we have in schools in Scotland. Okay. The teacher came in one day and wrote on the board dy by dx. dy by dx. Calculus. Remember calculus at school? One or two people nodding, one or two people crying. No, some people may not remember it. He said dy by dx, he wrote it on the board, then he started to explain it, as he did. Now I was sitting there listening to him. I knew he was speaking English because I could understand some of the words, but I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. It was making no sense to me whatsoever. So anyway, he finished, and he gave us some exercises to do, and then he started walking around the class. Now, this was also the teacher who took the football team, and I was the captain of the football team. So, he obviously saw that I was in some distress. Maybe it was the loud sobbing, or the tears. No, I'm only kidding, I wasn't sobbing or I wasn't crying, but I was clearly showing signs of not having understood. So he sat down beside me and said, "What's wrong, Brian?" And I said, "I don't understand this." He said, "Which part don't you understand?" And I said, "I don't understand any of it." And he said, "Right, why don't you go and do Spanish?" That's what he said. That was the last day in my mathematics class. That was me. That was me. I was stupid. I couldn't understand dy by dx. Go and do an easy subject, like Spanish. That's what he said. So I did. I left the maths class, I went and did Spanish, and my Spanish is all right, isn't it? It's okay. It's all right. I got a higher Spanish. Now, what's my point? My point is, he should have tried harder, shouldn't he? He should have said, "Okay, you didn't get it. Let's try something different. Let's try and look at your preferred learning styles. Let's try and look at your multiple intelligences. Let's explore what kind of mindset you have when you come across a difficulty." He didn't do any of that stuff because, to be fair, he didn't know about it. Okay? Nowadays that wouldn't happen. I don't think. I don't think so. I don't think it would happen. So, high expectations, critical. Now, let's then talk a wee bit about mindsets. Has anyone come across the work of an American psychologist called Carol Dweck? D-W-E-C-K. Is that a name that means anything? Okay, I've got her book, the cover of her book in another slide. I'll let you see it later on, right? Carol Dweck is an American psychologist who's come up with a theory of mindsets. She believes that every human being, and although she's writing about learners, she means adults too, have one or two mindsets about intelligence and about how it affects learning. Okay, so there's a fixed mindset. So here's how it goes. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe the following. There is a single thing called intelligence. You can measure it. You can test it. You can come up with a score for intelligence. And when you've got the score, someone's score, you can then predict with certainty how good or bad that person will be in their learning in the future. And, by the way, you can't actually influence it. You can't improve your intelligence, it's fixed. Okay? With me on this one? So if you have a fixed mindset, that's roughly speaking how you see intelligence. If, on the other hand, you have a growth mindset, it goes like this. There isn't a single thing called intelligence. There are multiple intelligences, as Howard Gardner would say. He would say 8, some people would say more. Not only that, you can grow your intelligence. You can make it better by doing stuff. And not only that, the brain, which is the place where intelligence seems to lodge itself, the brain, as most people now agree, is plastic. It can move, it can grow bits. Bits of the brain can develop just because you undertake new tasks. In fact, I would hesitate to say this, but maybe by the end of this afternoon, your brain will be a little bigger as a result of participating in this discussion. Who knows? Who am I to say? I'm not going to scan your brain when you leave, but it's just a chance. So, the brain itself is plastic and intelligence is not fixed. You can actually improve it by practice. Now, why does she think it's a problem to have a fixed mindset rather than a growth one? Well, if you're a student in a class and you have a fixed mindset and you come across something that's difficult, you're likely to give up and say, oh, wait a minute, for a second, I can't do that, I can't do that. It's too much for me, it's too difficult, can't do it. Or you might, as some students do, I don't know if they do it in your country, they certainly do it in ours, you'll find someone to blame for the fact that you can't do it, and it's usually the teacher. Isn't it? It's usually the teacher. It's the teacher's fault. And so you get into that kind of sense that you don't have a responsibility to work harder to be successful in that bit of learning. If, on the other hand, you have a growth mindset, Carol Dweck says, and you come across a problem, you will say, oh, wait a minute, hold it a second. This is tricky. Haven't come across this problem before. I'm usually quite good at learning. So, what do I do next? Who do I speak to? What new approach can I take? How can I come at it from a different direction? Now, it's a sense in which this becomes quite important because lots of young people in our schools in Scotland are underachieving, I think, because they believe that the responsibility for success is not theirs, it's somebody else's. It's the schools, or it's the teachers. And a number of them are not taking responsibility for their learning because we are not giving them, if you like, the kind of information which they require. So, I think it's worth talking about, and we'll come back to it a bit later on. The last thing in terms of learning classroom is that school and the classrooms within the school should be a nurturing environment. They should be a place where young people have the facility to get the support they require when it's required. And it's a kind of support which doesn't come with any obligations, if you like. It's there for anybody who needs it at any given time. It's a nurturing environment. I should maybe tell you that I was asked to go and do a similar session like this with a secondary school staff recently in Glasgow. And I got quite a difficult time from some of my secondary colleagues who thought that nurture was all right in preschool. But by the time you reach secondary school, you didn't need to be nurtured. Now, I don't know about you, but I won't tell you exactly what age I am, but you've probably worked out, and I need nurturing now again. I quite like a nice nurture. Everyone needs nurture at some point. So, a nurturing environment is an environment which is there to support learning and to intervene in ways which raises young people's self-esteem and gives them the chance to regroup and try new things. That's what I see as a nurturing environment. Okay, am I going too fast? Nobody's interrupted me yet. Did you know there's going to be a test at the end of this? Did I forget to tell you that? Okay, now, I thought maybe what we'd now look at would be the concept of thinking. Some of you may know that in the year 2000, Queensland in Australia was looking at its curriculum and come up with what they called the new basics. So the old basics used to be reading and writing and so on, that kind of thing, and arithmetic. So they thought, well, they're still important, but there should be a new set of basics. There should be basics like problem solving, creative thinking, critical thinking. All of these things in the 21st century are going to become more rather than less important. So, if we translate that into school and try and think of promoting thinking, can I ask you to turn to your partner, your person sitting next to you, and could you just share with them one type of thinking